Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Daymare 1998. I played it on the Xbox One. It's also available on the PS4 and PC. So let's get into the story. In this game, you play as several characters. You play as several individuals from a paramilitary group. They're kind of like a private security organization, as well as an individual from a certain town called Keensight. Each of them has their own chapter, and it goes into what's going on and this crazy evil corporation making bioweapons, some people trying to cover it up, some people just trying to survive, some people out for revenge, etc., etc. And I gotta say, overall, the story is not that strong. I mean, there's a decent story there, it's just not necessarily well told throughout. And I'm gonna bleed a bit into the voiceover work and whatnot here, but the dialogue is very weak and it makes the voiceover work kind of worse. And it makes it hard to get into the story because the dialogue is just not believable. While the story itself is fine and overly familiar, it's not well told. And since I already started bleeding into it, let's get into the audio. And like I said with the voiceover work, it's bad. The voiceover work is very bad. It's just not believable. It's poorly delivered. It's as if they were just reading the lines for the first time and that was being recorded. It doesn't do the voice actors any benefit that there is just, the dialogue is, like I said earlier, just trash. As for the music's okay in the game. It's really not noticeable. It doesn't stand out to you as good or bad. It just kind of exists. As for the sound effects, they're terrible as well. They're not really that good. They work okay, but there are definitely times where things get well out of sync. Like the audio and visual are just completely not in sync, and by a considerable margin. We're talking like seconds off. And on top of that, one of the characters, when he is running around, he jingles and jangles the entire goddamn time, and it's really distracting. It's horrible. I was so glad when I was no longer playing as him because that sound effect was no longer there. Let's get into the mechanics, and it is a third-person, over-the-shoulder, action, horror kind of game. It has some interesting ideas, but they just don't make sense with all the other things going on. One of the interesting things I thought they did was the reload system. You can do a quick reload where your character will just drop the mag, and any ammo that is in that magazine is gone, or you can do a slow reload, which obviously takes more time, and they save the magazine. Now that is a realistic element. The problem is that why include that realistic element when you have such other unrealistic elements as shooting enemies in the head 8 times and not killing them? Which leads into another problem with the game, which is the inconsistency in damage to enemies. Using the handgun, I have shot enemies in the head up to 8 times to kill them. And I do mean in the head. It's horrible. But then there have been other times where I've shot the same type of enemy with the same type of gun, and I have hit them in the arm once and they died. Like straight up died. Inconsistencies like that get really, really frustrating, and it's just kind of hard to deal with because it doesn't make any sense. And let's get into one of the characters, specifically Sam, has these hallucinations, and oh my god, I hate them. I get what they were trying to go for with them, and it was supposed to be spooky and show that he's like struggling with everything that's going on, as well as he has mental illness, etc., etc. But the problem is, it just fucks up everything. It's like somebody held a still image in front of the camera, and there's still shit going on behind it that you can't see until they pull it away. And while that's annoying when you're just running around, it's horrible when there are enemies that are active before the hallucination ends. I was literally trapped in one of those situations where I walked through an entire hallway with these weird flash images that were blinding me and just fucking with my ability to see while I was going through these hallways, and it dumped me in a room where there were active enemies who were already moving towards me before the hallucination had even finished. Which led to me getting attacked, and by the time I escaped, I had lost about 40% of my health. Those things aside, it's a linear game. You move through certain areas, there's limited exploration for items, there's some puzzles, and some of them are just trash, like one where there's a code in the books You can look at the code, you can figure out the numbers, but that doesn't help you figure out the order of the numbers, so you're still sitting there fucking around playing with it. And that's just kind of generally their mentality towards puzzles, is they're almost clever, but then they're so half-assedly executed that they end up just being obnoxious. And that's not true of every puzzle in the game, but it is true of a lot, and I will say, mechanically speaking, this game very, very clearly wears its inspiration on its sleeve and waves a giant fucking sign. Now, as for the controls are probably one of the better parts of this game, specifically in that the shooting and the responsiveness overall is good. I didn't have a lot of issues where I felt like I missed because the game fucked me. If I did miss, it was my own fault, generally speaking. But I will say the movement does feel a little sloppy, and there are some weird control decisions like the sprint. Most games, if you're going to move, you push a little bit on the stick, you walk. You push it all the way, you jog, and then you may have to hold down a button to sprint, or there's some combination of those, but it doesn't require too much effort. Unfortunately in Daymare, no matter how hard you push on the stick, it's walk, then you have to hold the left bumper to jog, and then you have to hold down the left stick to sprint. All of that combined is just a little too much, and it doesn't always work when you need it to, so it can kind of screw you when you're trying to sprint past an enemy and it doesn't quite execute, or you turned a little left, you strafed a little left or right, and suddenly you stop sprinting and you're just fucked. I also did have some issues with the game responding to me pressing certain buttons to switch weapons. It wouldn't always do it, I'd have to press a couple of times. So basically, apart from the camera control, this game has some issues. And lastly, the visuals. I mean, God, what do you expect at this point? Like, what do you expect me to say at this point? The visuals are not great. I do think the enemy design is decent, but everything else feels fairly generic. I mean, the paramilitary dudes, their uniforms, we've seen them before. I'm not gonna say where, but it may or may not be from the game that inspired this game. As for the town, it doesn't feel like any town you haven't seen before in other games. The creature design is fine enough, but it still feels overly familiar. And the people just, they don't look realistic, they don't look like real human beings. A lot of them do not. Some of them better than others, but it's not great. So to wrap this up, I think you can see where I'm going with this, but to put it simply, this game would have been okay had it also not been a $40 game. That's just way too much for the quality of what is there. It could have been a good game, but there are all these tiny little things that just chip away at it, and yes, I understand that it is an indie studio. In fact, this group was once upon a time working on their own Resident Evil 2 remake, which got shut down by Capcom because they were working on their own Resident Evil 2 remake, so the owners obviously weren't down with some independent group doing it. Knowing that fact, you can understand what I was saying by they were definitely wearing their inspiration on their sleeve. This game also suffers from the problem of it needed to come out about 3 years ago. I say that because, quite frankly, if you want to play a Resident Evil-like game, well then you can just go play Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3. The game is a decent length, but just at the end of the day, the quality is not there, especially with a $40 price tag. If I had paid $20 for this, I might be more comfortable recommending it, but as it stands at $40, I'm not okay with recommending it. It's way too much for what you get. So no, I don't recommend this game, which is unfortunate because I would love to recommend more indie games. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me, what is your favorite Resident Evil-like game? Because man, a ton of them came out on the PS1. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one.